Tonight, we will feature Farm Without Harm, Agricultural Climate Impacts and Solutions. So as we wait for a few more people to join us, just a few housekeeping items. Please remember to keep yourself muted for the duration of the presentation. And we would love to know where you're from and what brought you to our webinar tonight. So as Abby said, please use the chat box and pop your information in there, because we love to see the chats that go on as we go through the webinar presentations. Also note, the chat box will be monitored. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please ask them in the chat box and we'll get to them after the presentation. And if you have not already done so, please register for our final 2 webinars that are coming up in the next 2 months. One is next month on the 27th will be Sustainable and Resilient Healthcare in the Midwest. And then the final webinar in the series is going to be on the social determinants of health and environmental justice. And that is happening on the 25th. So please pop on over to the Eventbrite registration site if you have not already registered for those, because if you've liked what we've done so far, you're going to love those as well. Now I'd like to take time to introduce our organizational partners. I'll kick us off. So my name is Anna Safranek, and I'm the Program Director for Ohio Clinicians for Climate Action. Our mission is to advocate for positive climate solutions and that promote better health and greater equity for our patients and communities. And we primarily do this through advocacy efforts and education. Abby, would you like to introduce Wisconsin?
Yes, thank you, Anna. It's great to be here tonight and to co-host with all you wonderful folks. I'm really excited to hear about tonight's topic. Our group, the Wisconsin Health Professionals for Climate Action, is a group of health professional volunteers from all across Wisconsin, letting policymakers and the public know that climate change is a health emergency and we need equitable solutions to protect our health. And we do our work through advocacy, education, and anti-racism education.
Great, thank you, Abby. Is Julie on for Michigan? No. All right, we'll circle back. Brenna, you want to go for health professionals for healthy climate?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Brenna Dahani here. I am the Executive Director of Health Professionals for a Healthy Climate. We are the Minnesota partner in this Great Lakes series. And similar to all of our partners, we try to educate health professionals about the health impacts of climate change so that they can then go out into the world, into their spheres of influence to help to also educate patients and to bring this issue to bear on policymakers as well. So we advocate for solutions to the climate crisis that are health focused. And if you want to learn more about us, we're at hb4hc.org and hope that any folks here from Minnesota would like to join us as we go forward. Thanks so much for this partnership. We really appreciate it and looking forward to your presentation, Anna.
Great, thank you, Brenna. Robert, for Illinois, would you like to tell us about your organization?
Yeah, we couldn't unmute ourselves, just so you know. Oh. I'm from Michigan, so you have to unmute us.
Oh, sorry about that.
There we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Robert Needleman. I'm a medical provider in Illinois, part of a small group that's put together the Illinois chapter of Clinicians for Climate Action. Excited to be here today. Anybody on the call is from Illinois and wants to learn more, please feel free to email me. I can put my email in the chat box. Excited to be here and excited to kind of develop this relationship.
Thank you. And Julie, sorry about that.
That's all right. Thank you for letting us all introduce ourselves. Well, Micah is very proud to be a part of this Great Lakes Association, this coalition of Clinicians for Climate Action. And I am humbled to be in this Zoom room with all this talent and intelligence. So, so thank you for doing this. It's amazing how it has come together. And I just wanted, we reiterate pretty much what everyone else is saying. We're doing advocacy work and doing our best to educate fellow clinicians, and we're trying to develop medical school curriculum about climate. So we're, you know, we're all kind of sharing the same space, I think. And I also encourage you all to, if you're from Michigan, please contact us. We are also doing the next webinar on April 27th at 7 p.m., which is decarbonizing healthcare. So please come to that too. It should be fun. It should be interesting.
Great, thank you, Julie. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Just a quick reminder, if you just popped into the webinar, pop your introductions into the chat box along with what brought you here for this topic. We'd love to see that. And if you have a question throughout the presentation, also use the chat box feature and we will get to it at the end. So tonight we'll be having a guided conversation with two very knowledgeable and passionate people. In preparing for this webinar, I have enjoyed getting to know them, learning from them, and really witnessing the excitement they have for this subject. So thank you, Amalie and Erin, for joining us tonight. And without further ado, I will make introductions. Amalie Liptsreu, is the policy director for the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. Amalie has more than 25 years of public and social service experience. She received her bachelor's degree from Hiram College and a master's degree in environmental policy from Kent State University, after which she began her career focusing on agriculture and food systems. Amalie conducted research and advocacy that led to the development of the Ohio Food Policy Advisory Council, which she managed along with the Office of Sustainable Agriculture at the Ohio Department of Agriculture. Now Amalie is with the OEFFA, working on both state and national policy while advancing the organization's vision to help sustainable and agricultural farms thrive, have local food nourish our communities, and agricultural practices protect and enhance our environment. And Chef Erin Meyer has her master's degree in food science and is a registered dietitian and the founder of Basil's Harvest. Basil's Harvest is a nonprofit organization that exists to nourish a more healthful, equitable, and resilient food system by shining a light on the important connections between the health of people, farms, and soil. They believe everyone plays a vital role in healing our planet and improving our own health and well-being. As a chef and RD, Erin's work revolves around food. Through her work at Basil's Harvest, along with her current role in developing the Basil's Harvest nonprofit, she is exploring all facets of building our connections to healthier food, from how food is grown to addressing solutions to help reimagine a sustainable food system. Erin does this through collaborative actions with farmers, professionals, and organizations in all public arenas, as well as experiential learning. She applies a systems lens to engaging strategic actions that generate the most powerful and durable impact. So again, thank you both for joining me this evening and joining this webinar to educate everyone on farming practices and how we can better improve what we know as clinicians to drive change in these systems. So Erin, I'll direct the first question of the night to you. How does conventional farming impact the climate change in food systems in relation to health?
So thank you for that introduction, Anna, and I'm really happy to be here. And to start off this question and this conversation that we're all excited to be a part of, I think about it first from a food systems perspective. And if we consider that our current food system, it favors the production of animal products and highly refined, calorically dense food rather than fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and better meat. What that has led to, if you think about this in the communities that you live in or are a part of, is that this is causing almost the collapse of our rural communities. The farms that we're losing, the businesses that we're losing, and that has a direct impact related to how our food is grown, processed, distributed, and eaten. If we take that and we move into that health cost, we know that the increased rates of diet-related disease like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, we can directly link that to the foods, the ultra-processed foods, the calorically dense foods, the foods that are being eaten that are easy, that are cheap. Those impacts is creating an issue, and it's all related to conventional farming. We also know that industrial agriculture has led to a decline in nutrient density of crops. That's being researched now, which is very interesting. We know that this type of farming increases water pollution, that creates runoff, animal waste. We also know that there's an issue with antibiotic resistance that can be correlated to animal production. Air pollution related to this conventional farming has been linked to asthma. We know that there are endocrine disruptors like atrazine. So if we look at just these things and the impact that conventional farming is having, the cost is huge from a social, economic, and environmental standpoint.
Great, thank you for that. Amalie, did you have anything to add?
Sure. Thanks for that great overview, Erin. Just a few more pieces on that. Conventional agriculture tends to be a major contributor to global climate change and is responsible for 10% or more of human-made carbon dioxide emissions, 60% of nitrous oxide emissions, and about 50% of the country's methane emissions. Really a heavy reliance on petrochemical inputs, intensive cultivation of land and animals, long distance shipping, and indirectly deforestation leads to degraded and eroded soils, which all contribute to the problem. Many farmers use large amounts of oil to manufacture, transport, and apply fertilizers and pesticides that contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has identified that approximately 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions currently come from agriculture. I'll stop for a minute just to say that while agriculture definitely can be part of the problem, agriculture can definitely also be a major part of the solution. Erin spoke to some of the human health impacts, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I would say too that, our food system is really predicated upon artificially cheap food.
Yep.
We don't directly experience the hidden costs, whether it's the way the market externalizes the environmental or human health costs on individuals or on society as a whole. We pay in the form of agricultural policy that subsidizes large-scale commodity agriculture, largely focused on a handful of commodity crops, many of which are not even intended for direct human consumption, but maybe for ethanol, other bioenergy, or animal feed. Currently, taxpayers subsidize approximately 62% of the costs of crop insurance for these commodities, which often lock producers into large-scale monocropping systems because there's less risk involved. And then finally, the only other piece I'd add is that the level of consolidation and control in the food and agricultural system was very painfully evident when the pandemic first hit us last year. And there were bottlenecks in food processing and distribution that forced farmers to euthanize animals, dump milk, and destroy crops at the same time. many grocery shelves were bare. You know, luckily at this time, I know in the Ohio communities where I live and work, many people turn to local and regional producers for food. There's really an important lesson in there for food systems resilience that we may or may not heed. I certainly hope we do. So thanks, Erin and Anna.
And I know you had just mentioned about the soil degrading with the conventional farming, and we had talked about it in prepping for this webinar. So can you talk a little bit about how soil health actually impacts climate change and human health in the grand scheme of things, Amalie?
Thanks, Anna, for that question. I think the issue of soil health is just such a hot topic right now. It's something that's popular among scientists and really farmers across the board. I would say there's an adaptation and a mitigation role for soil health to cope with climate change that's expected to be both rapid and unpredictable. Agricultural systems really have to be resilient, as Erin said, and adapt to a changing climate. And those resilient systems are more likely to maintain or even improve economic, ecological, and social benefits as we face these dramatic climate changes. And agroecological systems can help reduce these greenhouse gas emissions through soil health practices that sequester carbon, promote nutrient strategies that minimize the use of soluble nitrogen, utilize conservation practices, planting of trees, shrubs, aerobic composting of plant and animal wastes, and energy conservation, including reduced use of the previously mentioned petroleum-derived fertilizers, pesticides, and fuel. One of the key pieces on this is that scientists are increasingly making the connection between the soil microbiome and human health. Dr. Frederick Provenza has written a lot about this, and really at the basic level, we can cultivate life by using nature as a model for how to produce and consume food by decreasing our dependence on these fossil fuels to grow, process, and transport food, and by transcending persistent battles over a one-size-fits-all plant or animal-based diets. I'm going to share just a few statistics, and I would refer people who are really interested in this connection. The National Sustainable Agriculture put together a really comprehensive report on agriculture and climate change that's available on sustainableagriculture.net. And there's a few key statistics on soil health that I'm just going to highlight. Sustainable organic conservation ag systems can build about 500 pounds of carbon per acre per year in cropland soils. Best soil health management on the world's agricultural lands, plus reforestation of idle and depleted lands could reduce atmospheric carbon in the year 2100 by 156 parts per million. And best soil health management and crop breeding for nutrient efficiency show the potential to improve nutrient cycling and reduce harmful nitrous oxide emissions. If you're really interested in the connection between the soil food web and the human microbiome, Dr. Elaine Ingham is a tremendous resource. Dr. Ingham has been studying the soil food web for more than 30 years and has made important connections with the human gut microbiome. Basically, she says that the plant soil microbiome includes the totality of viruses, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, and plants interacting to build soil in their collective genetic material. While the human gut microbiome is the totality of, again, microorganisms, bacteria, virus, protozoa, and fungi, and their collective genetic material present in the GI tract. It's variability in the human gut that relates to our dietary choices, the type of farming systems, and the way we prepare food, which all affects organisms that will be selected over time in DNA shifts, because the gut conditions select for different sets of species. So the organisms in your digestive system come from the surfaces of the plant material that you consume. There's beneficial biology on the surface. And we really want to consume those organisms that come from a healthy soil, according to Dr. Ingham, and where that healthy, soil microbiome is present, and we can get that material on the surface of that food stuff. So the soil and the human microbiome are connected in that way and complement each other. Good soil microorganisms will contribute to our health. And by contrast, soils that are mined in industrial agriculture are devoid of this healthy soil food web. And that directly relates to why we need to invest in soil for human health, for the adaptation to and mitigation of climate change.
Wow, it amazes me, how much what the food actually grows in can have an impact on human health, as well as the opportunities available to help with climate change. That's amazing. Thanks, Amalie. Erin, so why should clinicians care about green or organic agriculture? Oh, you're on mute, Erin.
Okay. I'm on mute. I can fix that. When I was thinking about this question, I was also thinking about it in the context of a regional system. So why should we care about this? But also, why should we care about it within our own communities? And what those potential impacts could be. And, as healthcare professionals, not only should we care, but I wanted to point out that the hospitals within our communities are anchor institutions, and they have the ability to leverage their spending power and their policy power. And that's an important piece, I think, of this conversation, because, we are healthcare professionals, and in some ways we're at the grassroots level, whereas the institution itself might be at a little higher level, and you may be a part of that higher level. But I think it's important that we start to connect these dots. And as healthcare professionals, we're under this umbrella, and we have that opportunity to support and take action in community health initiatives around climate change and human health. And a couple of things that I wanted to talk about regarding why I think this is important is looking at through a food systems lens. And Amalie talked about this earlier. When you look at it through the three legs of sustainability, the economic, the environmental, and the social, and why we should care about organic agriculture or sustainability or food systems is from an economic standpoint. By creating a more viable food system within your region, it's increasing the economic viability and stability of your community. And that leads to, more stable farm incomes. So if you're working in a rural area, or, you might be in an urban area, but the rural community is close by, the farms are dying, and they're becoming these monoculture farming operations. And if we think about that, we're losing the number of farms and the number of farmers in our community. So if we look at this from organic agriculture or sustainability, thinking about that, of building bringing more people back to the farms and this organic agriculture, why we should care, the incomes and the return on investment is potentially higher. We're saving farmland. So instead of that farmland being turned into neighborhoods, that we're actually saving the farmland, and that can lead to the environmental impact of all of this, where we see biodiversity increasing. Still thinking about the economic side of things, thinking about the community resilience, I wanted to give an example of a community that I worked with. It's a small community of about, I think, population 2,500 people, and they were surrounded by large farms that grew corn and soybeans. I'm from Illinois. That's what you see on the landscape. And there was a family who saw it differently, that they saw this opportunity where they could grow multiple crops, and they were close enough to Chicago to supply the restaurant community. And that went from one farm to building a 25 farm cooperative. And this 25 farm cooperative is bringing back almost $3 million a year back into the community. And that's what I mean by when we think about why should we care from an economic standpoint, because that's creating jobs. It's providing better food for the community. From a social impact, it's a public health issue, right? It's not only the food we eat, but it's also how it's being grown, how it's being produced, marketed, and distributed. And if we're not familiar with that and how food is being grown or how it's being produced and marketed, it's something to seek out more information, because those foods are impacting, our health and our well-being, right? And examples of that is, why we should care is that if we can change the way our food's grown in our regions, we have the opportunity to decrease chronic disease. We have the opportunity to provide fresh, flavorful food, so we can advocate for our farmers. We can advocate for, dietitians who are working with community health, or maybe they're working with you in partnership as a physician. You can partner with them, and we can bring this food to the table. It strengthens food security. In our community, the SNAP program, the dietetic internship oversees the SNAP program at the farmers market. And the dietetic internship created a fund, so any dollars raised goes directly back into the SNAP program, so they can do double coupons. And so they're also marketing to food insecure areas. So they're bringing people to the market that maybe wouldn't have been to a farmer's market before. So thinking about why you should care, because you have access to share information and to create opportunities to access food, to grow better food. Also building relationships with growers to help facilitate these collaborations. It's an opportunity that you have within your community. And as you're working with your patients, is connecting people back to their roots, their heritages, their culture, and their community, which becomes really important in terms of working with communities, working with resiliency. I'm working with a food bank, and we're working on a healthy food policy to really increase the different types of foods that are coming into the food bank. But one of the food bank directors brought up this point that you may bring in these foods, but how are you connecting to the cultures of the communities that we serve? If you bring in peppers, what do they do with that? And as a health professional, there's a pediatrician that is part of this group, and she's working with the food banks to actually create education resources to help serve those communities and populations. So I'm coming at this more of boots on the ground, and thinking about it in those aspects. And then lastly, from an environmental aspect, why should we care as healthcare professionals? Because if we can increase the diversity of food, if we can remove the monocultures across our landscape, and move away from corn and beans in Illinois to more of a diversified rotation, we're not only improving soil health, but we're also increasing bird populations and other beneficial animals and insects to come back into our area. This also, we're promoting emotional health and well-being. So as we think about this, it becomes really, really important. So those are some of the examples and some of my thought points that I had towards this question.
I love your example of the community that came together and really started bringing food into Chicago. That's such an inspiring story. Amalie, did you have anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to say, in some of these issues, I feel like we're bombarded with so much negativity, right? We've got all these statistics that are so dire, but there's so much positive that, Erin just highlighted a lot of the positive. I mean, when you focus on organic and sustainable agriculture, you're talking about individual health, you're talking about community health, especially when you're investing in kind of farmers of diverse scales, diverse cropping types, building back some of those abandoned rural communities that Erin spoke of earlier. And so it's like it is the three legs: the economic, the environmental, the social, and also the public health piece. I just wanted to share, I don't know if you ever read Mark Bittman, but he's a pretty excellent food writer. And he's come out with a new book recently. I was listening to an interview he did with Ezra Klein recently, and he posed the question of what is food for, right? And if we think about what food is for, if it's truly to nourish people, to promote health, our current system is failing right now. And there's a lot more that we need to do. And a lot of that really starts with investing in soil. The one piece that I really wanted to make sure to add here, because I work with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, or OFA. In addition to the public policy and education work that we do, we're a USDA accredited organic certification agency. We certify organic farms in 12 states in the Midwest. And a lot of people don't have a common understanding of what organic is. I think sometimes, there's just this thought that it's a prohibition on synthetic inputs, right? Which is a big part of it, but it's so much more than that. Organic was first codified in federal statute back in 2005 through the Organic Foods Production Act, which established consistent standards, national standards, for both food production and processing. All organic farmers need to develop what's called an organic systems plan every single year. This plan, it's a comprehensive plan, and it details how they are going to foster soil fertility. And this focus really on building on-farm soil fertility is so that they don't need or they don't rely on external inputs. So they want to build that on-farm fertility and resilience. Organic producers and processors keep detailed records of everything that they use, how they're building that fertility, any substances that they apply, their field history, what kind of buffers do they have between the organic farm and that conventional farm across the way, so that they're not being contaminated from the practices of those neighboring farms that might not be organic. How do they preserve biodiversity? How do they protect clean water. These are all things that organic farmers have to show every single year in their organic systems plan. This plan and all of the records that relate to that plan are subject to a multi-tier review by these USDA accredited organic certification agencies. And every year, these farms undergo an inspection, an independent third-party inspection. So I share all of this just to say that this is the most highly regulated form of agriculture that's available. And it's a voluntary form of regulation. This is regulation that farmers are asking for. They want a high level of regulation because they know the value of their product is only as good as the integrity of that USDA organic seal. So it's really a unique system in all of agriculture. And then I know we don't have a ton of time. I could wax on for a really long time about this, but I do want to share that the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania has been doing this farming systems trial for about 60 years now, where they've been comparing like conventional crops to organic crops and side-by-side farming trials for decades. And so when they compare this like conventional chemical agriculture with organic methods, they found that organic yields can match conventional yields and outperform them in years of drought and environmental stress. They're now looking at things like the carbon sequestration versus in these different systems, but they also found that organic systems use 45% less energy and had a 28% higher production efficiency than conventional systems. So there's a lot more that I could share, but I'm going to keep it short here because I know we don't have a lot of time.
Thank you
Anna,
for that. Go ahead, Erin.
There was a question that I thought was relevant, and it was asking about, I have to find it, I'm sorry. It was about farm policy. How do we change farm policy? And I know that Amalie will provide a lot of context here, but my initial thought was to that question, because it's a great question, and depending in terms of what profession you're in within healthcare, looking at your professional organizations to see where they stand on policy. It could, I'm a dietitian, so looking at it from diet, but also going into your local communities and the policy groups or organizations, like in Illinois, it's the Illinois Stewardship Alliance. And we have a soil health caucus that they put together that right now we're working on messaging related to, the farm bill that's still out a ways, but we're starting to work on that now because, regenerative agriculture, organic practices, this soil health piece is a huge piece. And so the farmers are starting to come together and starting to work in that. So that was just something that I saw that I thought was important.
And I know, Amalie, this is your wheelhouse. So do you want to speak more about how we can change policy?
Sure. I'll say it can seem like this really abstract behemoth, right? And, the biggest thing is the Farm Bill. That's this omnibus piece of legislation that's passed every 5 years. Our next Farm Bill is going to be up for reauthorization in the year 2023, which sounds a long way off, but we're already in the process of laying down what they call marker bills, which kind of set the tone for what we might want to see in the next Farm Bill. And I'll say there have been many of us around the country. Erin mentioned Illinois Stewardship Alliance, OFA, Michael Fields Agricultural Institute in Wisconsin, Land Stewardship Project in Minnesota, these national groups like the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, the National Organic Coalition, that are working very hard to change farm policy. But it is really these long-term kind of structural issues in the Farm Bill that need to be changed. Things like crop insurance subsidy policy, like, you know, obviously farm risk is really a difficult thing. If you're a farmer and you're dealing with the vagaries of markets and you're dealing with changing weather, which is only getting worse in the face of climate change, you need to reduce your risk. It's really important. You know, farmers are some of the biggest gamblers out there. They don't have a choice, right? So, you know, offsetting risk is important, but for example, if we're going to do that, if you and I are going to pay over 60% of a farmer's crop insurance premium, maybe we should be rewarding those farmers who are using good practices that build resilience, that sequester carbon, farmers that are using cover crops. You know, we have harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie that they've been studying for over 10 years. I don't even want to hazard a guess of how many tens of $millions have been spent on this issue. And I was in a meeting with one of our congressmen last week, and NRCS did a presentation saying that basically more than 80% of the Western Lake Erie watershed basin still has no cover crops during the winter. That's a huge issue. So, you know, as we think about this farm policy going forward, let's reward and incentivize good practices. And one of the things that I think Anna is going to share is a one-pager on a really important piece of legislation called the Agricultural Resilience Act that was introduced in the last Congress by Representative Shelley Pingree of Maine. I believe she's the only organic farmer in Congress. It's going to be reintroduced very soon. And it's one of the most comprehensive bills to deal proactively with agriculture and climate change and make serious investments in conservation and rewarding those good practices. So that's I'd say is one of the kind of the lowest hanging fruit for things that we can really advocate for that will make a huge difference in the years to come.
And what specifically can clinicians do to, you know, further the cause for this? Or what would be your best advice?
So I think there's a number of things that you can do. Of course, I would say, you know, stay in touch with those organizations in your state that are spearheading these policy issues. And again, I think Anna is going to have a list of some of those organizations for you. That's the flyer on the Agricultural Resilience Act with some details about it and a little bit about how you can engage. I would say, you know, take a look at this flyer after the fact. We can let you know when this is reintroduced in Congress, and it's really important and really easy just to call your member of Congress, whether it's your representative or your senators, and ask them if they've signed on to sponsor and support the Agricultural Resilience Act. I know in Ohio, I'm meeting with Senator Sherrod Brown's office on a regular basis to try and get him to sign on in support of this legislation. So that is a really kind of low-hanging fruit thing. And again, staying engaged with organizations like OFA, Illinois Stewardship Alliance, Michael Fields, Land Stewardship Project, that can provide you action alerts. We do policy bulletins every month to keep you apprised of what's happening and also what the engagement opportunities are on a really timely basis.
Thank you, Amalie. And we'll have a resource list in this flyer that we'll send out to attendees probably tomorrow, just so everyone's aware. Erin, do you want to speak a little bit about your organization and how people can get involved? You're muted. Erin, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can I just take a minute before I talk about Basil's Harvest, just to address a couple things that I was thinking about in terms of how clinicians can promote sustainable food systems to their patients? Yeah, I think that this is also really important. You know, when we think about food systems and we think about working with our patients and what we can provide to them or how we can help them integrate into a more just and sustainable food system, I think first it's important to remember that a sustainable and resilient food system conserves and renews natural resources, advances social justice and animal welfare, builds community wealth, and fulfills the food and nutrition needs of all eaters. And I say that because we come from all different backgrounds and our patients come from all different backgrounds. And as we look at this, there may be something that they're more interested in, and it might be in a way to open that door and starting to talk about this. So even just, you know, identifying that as you build relationship with your patients around this, but a couple simple ways: supporting local agriculture, you know, working with your community, understanding where the farmers markets are, what are some of the CSA programs available in your area, in your region? Are there food cooperatives, and is it locally sourced? You know, is there a buy fresh, buy local program that you could potentially resource and provide that information so it would show where your clients and your patients could access food? As you're talking to your patients, and we've talked a little bit about this, but just stressing that we're prioritizing a plant-based diet that's grown properly, whether sustainably. I don't believe that we're ever going to be all vegetarian, but I do believe that we should be eating less meat, but that meat that we do eat should be better meat, and understanding what that means and how that, you know, how to purchase meat, you know, learning more about that and working with your patients or your communities and your dietitian to help promote that. Seafood, you know, learning more about sustainable seafood. You know, one example is Sitka salmon shares. And I know they're in Illinois. I know they're in Wisconsin. I think that they're growing and moving to different parts of the country. But it's something, you know, something like that where it's promoting and supporting small fishermen, fisher farmers, and eating mindfully. You know, as we do this, and we have such an issue right now with food related diseases, and we're on a fast pace, you know, part of this is the emotional, mindful attitude that we can bring to our life and our table, you know, and having that discussion with your patients. If you're looking for different programs, because I know, and we didn't get to this, but you know, food access and economics play a huge role in this, don't they? And there are some programs out there that you might be interested in looking up. And one is Neighborhood Loaves. It's a program that was started by the Artisan Grain Collaborative, where a bakery is baking bread, and you buy a loaf for yourself, but you can also buy a loaf for somebody else. And I think they've delivered over 7,000 loaves to food banks and pantries. So there's different resources out there. So I just wanted to highlight a few things that you can do on the ground. And so, you know, now going to Anna's question about how you can be involved with Basil's Harvest. If you're interested in the conversation tonight or any of the things that we talked about or that I talked about, I would love to hear from you. And I can give Anna my number. A couple things that we're working on. Basil's Harvest is really working at the intersect of food, farm, and health. And the initiative that we have right now, we're in year 2 of this initiative, is a regenerative farm to hospital initiative, where we're working with 2 regenerative organic farms, an organic stone ground process mill, all in small communities. And we are working to get rolled organic oats into the hospital system. And along with that, we're working with Rodale on the soil health research side of things, looking at nutrient density of those crops. One of the items that we're going to be doing this year, and I would love to hear from you if you're interested, is that we're putting together a focus group of farmers and healthcare professionals, because as we go down this path of, getting food, whole foods, regionally grown into institutions, what is it that you as a healthcare professional, what is it that you're looking for, or how to connect to the farms? So we're developing this focus group now, and we'd be interested in hearing from you if you would like to participate or learn more about it as we develop it. The other item is that we are interested in expanding our reach both on the supply side and on the demand side. So if you're working with an institution that is starting to have conversations around, procuring regeneratively grown food and ingredients, we would, I'd just love to talk to you to learn more. So that's how, in terms of being involved in the work that we're doing, those are my talking points to that.
Great, thank you, Erin.
Anna, could I just jump in with one more thing? Because I don't want to forget to mention this. Someone typed in the chat about what's going to get us to come to our senses, stop working in a siloed manner. And one piece that I also wanted to share is an organization called the Eel Food Alliance. And I don't know how many folks are familiar with that organization, but it's HEAL stands for Health, Environment, Agriculture, and Labor. So this is definitely like a cross-sectoral focus on making real systemic change to the food and agricultural system that is very comprehensive. So if you're interested in that kind of comprehensive approach, check out the HEAL Food Alliance. Sorry for that interruption.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you if you wanted to speak about how people can get involved in OFA.
Sure. I would say, we're, really easy to engage with. Our website is www.oeffa.org. As all of our members receive, as I said, a monthly policy bulletin. We also have a policy advisory committee, which, that's like our steering committee and really helps guide the work that we do. We have a lot of resources out there. And I would say, in terms of resources too, I just, the organic agriculture system is not perfect. And I'll, be really upfront about that. We fight on a regular basis to maintain the integrity of the National Organic Program, but it's the best thing we've got going right now. I know there are some issues around, or perceived issues around cost and like diversity and issues that need to be addressed and that we can address. But that USDA organic CO is really an important thing to look for and to communicate. And I don't think, I know there are concerns around cost, and I think there are programs out there to help us overcome some of those cost issues. But if we ignore that, and if we tell people they have to be thankful for the food they get, then we're creating another environmental justice issue where people, by virtue of their socioeconomic status, are forced to bear the burden of these environmental hazards of the pesticide and the herbicide and the fungicides used on food and the bioaccumulation in the body, which is just not, it's just not the way we want to proceed as a society. And I would also share that Friends of the Earth, just to get to the health piece, they've done some really interesting studies. We actually helped them with a research project. They had people go into major grocery outlets throughout the United States and pull standard items off the shelf that were sent to an independent lab in California for testing. And I won't go into all the details, but the levels of glyphosate, the levels of neurotoxins, the things that were in applesauce, the children are eating every day, were unconscionable. And they also did a study and looked at, I believe it was 6 families that were on a conventional diet and then switched to an organic diet. And within a relatively short period of time, the toxic load in their body of these chemical contaminants was significantly reduced. So there's real opportunities for us to promote what Erin spoke to in terms of really nutrient-dense food, but also food that's free from some of these chemicals that are currently not allowed in other countries, but are still permitted for use in the United States.
Thanks for that, Amalie. So jumping to some of the questions in the chat, how is it possible to do this on a global scale? Is it even possible? And would we be able to feed the world's population without using GMOs? Either one of you want to take a stab at this?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be glad to jump in, and Erin, feel free as well. I mean, I think, you know, there's a dominant narrative that's out there, right? And it's really popular. It's really pervasive. The whole concept that farmers need to get big or get out, that we have to feed the world, are these just, you know, there are narratives that we don't question, but we should question, right? Because, you know, as I typed into the chat earlier, approximately 50% of our food is wasted. And a lot of these issues about food access relate to distribution, to food waste, to issues of poverty, systemic economic issues, not necessarily that we're not producing enough food. And so when we think and we hear these dominant narratives in our mind, I think we need to be asking ourselves, who does that narrative serve, right? And it serves the large agribusiness interests very well that make a living by selling these chemicals and keeping people on a treadmill of chemical use.
And I just wanted to add that if, you know, we've been talking about soil health and the importance of soil health, and if you follow that thread, if soil health is improving, and that's improving the plant health, and we're hypothesizing that it's also going to improve the nutrient density of the crop, whether it's a seed or a fruit. The other piece of this that I think is important to consider is that, and I preface it with, I worked with an agronomist who was working on a 150-acre biodiverse farming operation. And one of the things that he told me is that, you know, a plant has the capacity to yield large volumes, whether it's a tomato plant or a pepper plant or whatnot, but we're not providing the right nutrition to the soil, to the plant to harvest and to get those yields. So, you know, what I hope comes out of this, and as we look down the road, is that as we improve our soil health, and if we are increasing our diversity, that we're also increasing our yields, that's providing more foodstuffs, and we're not going into that mindset of getting bigger is what we have to do. I don't know if that makes sense or not. Amalie, if I'm on target with that.
Definitely.
Yeah. You know, and another piece of this is, you know, we talk about food waste and you know, we talk about access. The other piece of this that I think is really important to understand, if we're moving towards a more plant-based diet, and that's what we're promoting to our patients, we also need to be asking the questions to our patients, how they prepare foods, what they're used to, what flavors, what tastes, what, you know, because I say that because, you know, you can give somebody a pepper, but if they don't know how to cook it or cut it or use it, then it becomes food waste, you know? So, and if they don't know what it's supposed to taste like, or they're not used to that taste, And my example to that is I had a client and she was very interested in making lifestyle changes and behavior changes. But the one comment she said at the beginning of this journey is that, if it, doesn't look like a Cheeto and doesn't taste like a Cheeto, I like what Cheetos taste like. I like that. And so, and I'm eating, now you're telling me to eat, corn, or I'm working with you and I'm going to try different foods, but they don't taste like what I'm used to. So it's this behavior change piece that is vital to creating change and success for everybody that's switching over to a more whole foods, plant-based diet.
And I think to your point, there are some in an organization I used to work with previously, they had a farmer's market where their head chef of the hospital would do food, and he would do a food demonstration, and anybody who came out during the farmer's market, he would show them how to prepare, this dish based on what was at the farmer's market. And the same organization opened a women's and children's clinic, and they had their dietitians do kitchen demos every Friday for the moms who would bring their kids in to show them how to cook certain foods that were, healthier for their families. So I think that is a really vital piece, is knowing how to actually cook something that you're getting.
And if I can just mention real quick, because I think the Michigan group is creating curriculum for for medical students. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that I'm partnering with a hospital and the School of Medicine in Illinois, and we have created a 3-year program that's mandatory for medical students and residents. And it's actually bringing them into the kitchen, or with COVID, we're doing Zoom, but we're providing them with the ingredients, the recipes, and we're teaching them techniques, and it's all related to a specific food related disease. And so that's something that is also important for health professionals, in terms of talking with their clients and their patients and such. So I just wanted to mention that also.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to another question in the chat. This one's for you, Erin. Can you speak on how you connect food banks with farmers and what the initial response was?
Sure.
How you helped create the connections?
Sure. So I got a phone call from a food bank that they actually participate in HEAL, which Amalie had just mentioned, the HEAL organization. And they're participating in the HEAL organization, and they reached out asking me to be a part of their convenings. And at first they were looking for just a list of local farms, regional farms that they could put onto a list and have that and potentially reach out to them. So they were just getting started with just the thought process of what could this look like. The first goal of this whole project is to create a healthy food policy. Within that healthy food policy, it's to have this list of regional farms and growers. That has advanced, and it's not associated with the work that we're doing, but Feeding America, the Illinois site, along with the Farm Bureau, they got funding, and they're doing a landscape analysis, collecting data on farms and growers. And then they're going to start talking about how do we take this data of all of these farms and growers, and how do we start having the conversation of creating a local food connection to the food bank. So there's two things happening within the state. That's the second thing that's happening. So we've created this list, and then along with this healthy food policy, one of the things that the food bank received funding from a foundation that the stipulation is that they have to purchase food grown or processed within a 3-county area. And so I was also helping to answer questions and help facilitate where I could facilitate within that conversation. And that will be, I think, a reoccurring grant for them. So we're just at the beginning stages of this. But one thing that I do know, and the question about working with farmers to food banks, is that there are a handful of farmers in our area that supply to food banks. I think the mill, the Stone Ground Mill, they provide flour to certain food banks, and when they change grains, they have to blow out the flour, the grains that's turned into flour. They have to blow that out and clean the machines, and so it's a combination of flours, but they're able to bag it and they're able to give instructions on how to use it. So that's going to food banks. Then there are also, if there's harvests that are bountiful, they share a percentage of their harvest with the food banks. So there's a lot of work that farmers are doing in building relationships with food banks. Also seeds. So sharing seeds with food banks to provide to participants and consumers that have gardens. So that was a long-winded narrative to say that we're at the beginning of this process.
Thank you. Somebody mentioned hydroponics in the chat. Amalie, how do you feel that hydroponics fits into discussion?
I think that, hydroponics are probably a good solution in some situations. I know that, they're frequently looked to in many urban communities. I think that, one thing we do have to do is, in some ways, temper our desire sometimes for silver bullets to some of our problems. I think that, when it comes to energy use, I don't know that we've always done full life cycle analysis to look at all of the energy costs of these production systems. But I do think they hold a lot of promise in certain situations. I will share that there's a really heated debate right now in the organic community about hydroponics being able to be certified organic, because organic is a holistic ecological system based on soil health. And so the fact that many, if not most, of these hydroponic systems use water-based liquid fertilizer inputs, there is some question about ecological costs and benefits and nutrient density of that food. So I don't know if I quite answered that question, but.
Thank you nonetheless. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email them to me and I can pass them on to the speakers. My email is occa@theoec.org. And please don't forget, we have a webinar coming up next month about decarbonizing healthcare that is being hosted by Michigan. So with that, I would like to again thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Amalie, and thank you, Erin, for presenting tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for having us.